These preliminary thoughts remain abstract, designate, disengaged as they are from the more intractable realities of actual cultural identity and encounter. How might we give them some substance? What do they amount to in a particular context? In the following discussion, I want to consider the question of Turkish identity and cultural experience, and to do so particularly through the relationship between Turkey and the European West. I believe it cannot be considered outside this relation. First, we shall have to consider the Turkey of the European imagination, associated with memories of the Ottoman threat to Christendom, the Eastern question, fear of Islamic revival, and resentment against Turkish migration. The projections of the European psyche have been and remain fundamental impediments to cultural encounters and understanding. In the following sections, I want to look at the reality of Turkish culture and cultural transformation, taking into account particularly its European orientation and context, the Western question, in Turkish cultural identity. I shall consider the nature of its assimilation of Western modernity, especially in the period since the foundation of the Turkish Republic in 1923, and the discomforts and discontent that this entailed for its cultural life. Then I shall examine the recent developments involving the resurgence of repressed elements of the culture and endeavors to construct an alternative form of modernity and modern identity. Finally, I come to the question of what the changing identity of Turkey might entail for its relation to Europe. The question really is whether Europe can be open to these developments, open to their singularity, and consequently to their significance. Coming to terms with the Turk is a crucial aspect of the cultural reordering and reassociation that must be undertaken in the European space. A Turk doesn't go to the opera. Writing in 1925, Arnold Toynbee described the emergence of the Turkish nation in terms of the wholesale abandonment of one civilization and way of life and the adoption of another, likening it to a spiritual conversion. This mental change was motivated, says Toynbee, by the question of status. The Turks, like the Jews, have been, since they first made contact with the West, a peculiar people, and while this is an enviable position so long as you are top dog, it becomes an intolerable humiliation as soon as roles are reversed. In both cases, the status of a peculiar people has ceased to be a source of pride and has become a source of humiliation. And in both cases, therefore, a strong movement has risen to escape from it. The Turks sought to be admitted as full members of Western society in order to escape from terrible position of being its pariahs. In certain respects, they have succeeded in establishing their credentials as a westernized and modernized society, though at a psychic cost, as I shall argue later. Among Europeans, however, there has remained the sense that Turkey is not authentically on the West, the sense that it is alien, an outsider, an interloper in the European community. As Sefer Senokak puts it, there is the belief that a Turk reads the Quran, he doesn't go to the opera. In European eyes, Turks remain a peculiar people. Turkey has found a certain accommodation within the Western order. Its membership since 1952 of NATO reflects its key significance in Western defense and foreign policy agendas. During the Cold War era, Turkey's strategic geographical location and were, reach were seen as vital assets. It figured as both a barrier to Soviet expansion and a bridge to the Middle East. Since the end of the Cold War, Turkey has demonstrated its military value during the Gulf War and is now seen as a key player in a number of the geopolitical zones of the New World Order: the Middle East, Southeast Europe, the Black Sea, the Caucasus, Central Asia. Turkey must continue to be accommodated because of its significance in the changing European security environment. But this military involvement has not translated into political and cultural acceptance. Most significant and symbolic in this respect, of course, is Turkey's application for membership of European Union. In this case, we can see very clearly the nature of Turkey's accommodation within the Western order. As Richard Falk puts it, Turkey is not so much stand straighted at the European doorstep, but confined to the servants' quarters in the European house. Its accommodation on those terms is a decidedly precarious one. The case of Turkish membership of the Union has been forcefully put by successive governments. We are Europeans, says the Turkish president Süleyman Demirel. We would like to stay as Europeans. We would like to live with Europe. We would like to act with Europe. We will share the values of European civilization in addition to our own values. As a member of NATO, we have defended those values. Europe is not persuaded, however. Those who are more sympathetic to the Turkish petition will put forward the argument that Turkey is not yet become sufficiently Western to be accepted, or that it has not thoroughly resolved its identity crisis in favor of Westernization. What is invoked is the uncertainty of identity within Turkey. There appears to be some considerable doubt, even among Turks of similar socioeconomic background, as to the exact nature of the country and its people. In this case, it is what seems equivocal in Turkish culture that is so unsettling for Europe. Turkey is seen as in between place in its hybridity, its particular kind of hybridity. It still does not conform to European standards. Those who outrightly oppose Turkish membership have more fundamental grounds for objection. They draw attention to Turkey's Middle Eastern and Islamic connections. You have to have clarity about where the boundaries of Europe are, and the boundaries of Europe are not on Turkish-Iran border, argues Lord Owen. More recently, attention has been drawn to Turkish Asiatic origins. It was Genghis Khan's need for thought mercenaries that brought the Turks from their ancient homelands of Central Asia to the shores of the Mediterranean, writes Peter Millar in The European. For these objectors, there is something essentially un-European about Turkish culture. There can be no question of its assimilation into the Union. According to these perspectives, it is the Turk, uncertain of or alien, who is the problematical element in the encounter. The only problematical element, what they manifest, I will argue, is a cultural arrogance in European attitudes. We can consider we can consider it as a development of what Arnold Toynbee 70 years ago described as the Western question confronted by Turkish society. He was referring to the difference and contempt exhibited by the Western powers towards the newly emerging republic. This conjunction of great effects of other people's lives with little interest in or intention with regard to them. This arrogant stance is apparent now in this instability, insensibility shown toward Turkey's European aspirations. There is the demand that the Turks should assimilate Western values and standards, alongside the conviction that however much they try to do so, it will be impossible for them to succeed. Ivailov Ditchev sees it as a basic aspect in the relation of the European center of to its peripheries. These cultures, he argues, are asked to become part of the universal culture, but at the same time they are told that they will not be capable of doing so. Europe demands a sacrifice and does not accept it. The Turkish case simply shows how far it is possible to pursue this elusive universal culture, yes, still be derided and rejected. It also shows more tragically still how cultural arrogance can turn into cultural hatred when it is declared that the order is marked by an ins- insurmountable particularity and consequently can never be assimilated, converted into our culture. Then we have the basis of racism. Turks have come to be seen in this way by many Europeans. In Germany, the so called Gastarbeiter have been seen as a kind of continuation, this time by economic means, of the Ottoman Islamic onslaught on Europe. There is the sense of being overwhelmed by an alien culture, describing a National Socialist commemorative bronze in celebration of the liberation of Vienna in 1683. Claudio Magris knows the banner of the defeated Turks bore not the crescent but the Star of David. The Turks were simply identified with the enemy, which is to say the Jews, by means of a falsification which today is the xenophobic attitudes toward the seasonal foreign workers, runs the risk of becoming tragically true. The Turks were treated as pariahs. What has become a taboo in the case of the Jews because of the Holocaust, argues Safer Senokak, has become acceptable in the case of the Turks. The wholesale stigmatization of an entire people cause of their otherness. Solingen, Moln, Rostock, Hoyerswerda. The precipitation of identity. I want to turn now to consider the consequences of modernization within Turkish culture and identity. Turkey made the sacrifice. It made the westward turn from the period of the Tanzimat reforms. True to the movements of the young Ottomans and young Turks, the Ottoman Empire struggled to find some accommodation to Europe. The social revolution undertaken by Mustafa Kemal Ataturk in the 1920s was the culmination of this long process. Turkey opened itself unconditionally to the forces of Western modernization. We cannot close our eyes and imagine that we live apart from everything and far from the world. Mustafa Kemal declared, we cannot shut ourselves in within our boundaries and ignore the outside world. We shall live as an advanced and civilized nation in the midst of contemporary civilization. Insofar as the West was equated with the very principle of civilization, the logic of westernization had come to seem necessary and inevitable. The Kemalist elite was attracted to the light of the universal culture, the world of science and technology, rationalism and progress. It recognized that this will require fundamental social transformation of the Turkish people. As Stefan Gerasimos puts it, the necessity was recognized to civilize the people in order to appear as the representatives of a civilized people. It was resolved to adopt the Western institution of nationalism and the nation state. Westernization was the road to salvation for the Turkish people, and its adoption was to be absolute. What was being achieved? What kind of modernization and national culture have been instituted in the Turkish Republic? Turkey's modernization has been an arid and empty affair. The arrangements of a modern society has been put in place, to use Agnes Heller's terms, but anything resembling a modern dynamic has been lacking. In this respect, the European reluctance to acknowledge Turkey as genuinely modern has a certain justification. What is utterly justifiable, of course, is the West's encouragement, which still persists, of this particular logic of development as the only possibility, its inability, that is to say, to imagine modernity on the basis of any other sense of universalism. Modern Turkish culture has been imitative and derivative in its emulation of West European model. Sharif Mardin has bemoaned the real impoverishment of Turkish culture that resulted from republican reform, arguing that its symbols was too shallow and lacking in aesthetic richness to take. Cultural meaning is created only through affiliation and comparison to the Western ideal. The Turkish elites have constantly measured their achievement according to their resemblance to the European model, or rather their image of what it is. Cultural development is consequently to be understood in terms of more effective counterfeiting or simulation of the original paradigm. But of course, however good the simulation, it does not amount to the real thing. There has been a creative void at the heart of modern Turkish culture. The elite puts the old order in question, but it was not able through this process to liberate new meaning of a creative kind. It was a ersatz modernism that supplanted Ottoman culture.